Welcome everyone. This is our first off-site Hudson Area Library History Talk other than the cemetery, which we did in October of last year. Welcome to the history of the Robert Jenkins House, a home in Hudson. Jean Laporta will be presenting. I'm very excited. I've actually heard this presentation when she was working on it, and it is really fantastic. It's a very interesting history of this home. This program, I'm very proud to say, is a collaboration between the library and the Hendrick Hudson chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I just want to point out very quickly, both of our organizations have resources. The Hudson Area Library has a history room, and the Hendrick Hudson chapter of the DAR has a library that we can help you with family history and with local history research. We actually collaborate together. We share resources. We're in the beginning of, thinking more about that. But we focus on local history at the library, and there's a lot of genealogical information that we don't necessarily keep, but that is in the library of the DAR. So you're welcome to use either of our resources. I believe they're both free. And so researchers can come and look at the information. I also want to say that these history talks that are usually monthly, sometimes a little more often at the library, they're also free. When the DAR opens up this beautiful home for you and gives a tour or any kind of visit, it's free, but we do ask for donations. Because we're kind of taking over the house and there's a lot of work that the ladies had to do, we're saying that the donations are all for the Daughters of the American Revolution, this chapter. So there's a donation box in the hallway. On your way out, please think about that, and it would be lovely if you could give some donations. I just want to quickly tell you about a couple of upcoming things that are happening at the library programs that have to do with our history. Spring Fling Swing Dance Party is a collaboration of the library and the City of Hudson Senior Center. We're bringing dance back to the Armory. So, yay! So that's going to be Saturday, May 19th from 7 to 10 p.m. and the director of the Senior Center, Cher Stevens, is working on this, and it's going to be fabulous. In fact, the fabulous Versatones will be playing. So I hope to see you all there. Then we're going to have on Thursday, May 24th at 6 p.m., Future Hudson and Urban Designers Imaginings, What Ifs and What Nots, and Why Nots, sorry, by Matthew Frederick, who is an urban designer. He's put out a few books, and there's a new one that's being published that he'll have for sale there. And then we have a collaboration with the Leisler Institute, A Taste of Change, Handwritten Cookbooks as Documents of Social and Family History by Peter G. Rose. I'm sure some of you know this historian. And that'll be Thursday, June 21st at 6 p.m. And you are invited to bring your own family cookbooks and written recipes and things to share. She will be presenting, and then we'll have a sharing. And all of those flyers are on the refreshment table in the room over there. So, on to tonight. First, Virginia Martin will be introducing the history of the DAR. And Virginia Martin is Vice Regent of the Hendrick Hudson chapter of the DAR, and many of you know she's also one of the commissioners on the Columbia County Board of Elections. And you will introduce Jean?
I will.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is wonderful to see so many people. I'm going to tell you a little bit about DAR because I think a lot of people really don't know quite what DAR is. DAR is Daughters of the American Revolution. It's the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which was formed in 1890. So just a few years ago, it celebrated 125 years. It is a lineage society that's a nonprofit 501c3 charitable organization, and it's dedicated to historic preservation, education, and patriotism. Our chapter is the Hendrick Hudson chapter of the DAR, and we formed a few years later, 1895-96, and we received this chapter house in 1900, a few years after that, and that's what Jeannie, our regent, is going to be telling you about. DAR is open to women who are 18 years or older with direct lineage to what we call a patriot. And a patriot is someone who provided service or direct assistance in achieving independence from the British. So it's not necessarily a soldier. It could have been a merchant. It was somebody who in some fashion or other actually helped the effort to break away from the British. And DAR, this is very important, is both open and welcoming to all races, religions, and ethnicities. And DAR is more diverse than maybe you think it is. So you should know that. And that makes me feel very good. So I mentioned the objectives of DAR. They are historic preservation, education, and patriotism. In terms of historic preservation, that might be of sites, physical sites. It might be artifacts, records, and documents. And it might be preservation of historic dates. We celebrate historic dates. We try to keep that in, the national consciousness. It's education, and I'm going to quote from our bylaws. I really like this language. It's education toward, quote, an enlightened public opinion, and affording to young and old such advantages as shall develop in them the largest capacity for performing the duties of American citizens.
Wow.
So it's not just education, it's directed, and I like that very much. And then it's patriotism, which is support of those who are in the military now and support of those who were in the military, our veterans. I think you'd be very surprised to learn everything that the National Society has done over its 128-year history. I won't begin to go into that. I will tell you, our little chapter has done an awful lot too, and we do have some things that we're very proud of. I'll give you just a few. Number one is we award a Good Citizens Award to a high school senior every year, and we award one to a senior from each one of our 6 public schools, a girl or boy. And we give this award to somebody who has demonstrated dependability, service, leadership, and patriotism. They have to write an essay, and it's an essay topic that is given to us from National Society. So everybody is writing the same essay all across the country. And in 2016, I liked this particular topic, which was, how do the combined actions of many good citizens keep our nation moving forward? That's something to reflect on. I thought that was important. I loved the idea of high school students thinking about that. And then we have various active committees. For example, we have a conservation committee that last year, in conjunction with Cornell Cooperative Extension, started a pollinator garden in the back. We have a lawn in the back, and we started a pollinator garden in order to help revive pollinators like bees and butterflies and bats and birds. Give them a way station here right along this route in Hudson. And it's important to have pollinator gardens in various locations, so we have an important location here. Of course, we have a veterans activity recognizing and helping out current and former service members. We do have nearly monthly meetings here of our membership, and then after almost all of our meetings, we have a program with a speaker. And our meetings are open to the public. We try to publicize them, and we love to have people come in and enjoy our space and enjoy the programs that we put on. So keep that in mind. We do have a reference library, as Brenda said. It was the first one in the city, the first library in the city. It opened in 1898, not in this house, but the chapter was opened before we had this house. We have a historical collection. And then on the topic of historic preservation, which is one of our goals, we have this house. We have a chapter house, which is, this is something, historical preservation, we are preserving it. And this is what Jeannie, our regent, is going to tell you about.
Thank you,
To you.
Virginia. Thank you very much.
I have my slide presentation to give to you, but I wanted to say that as part of our mission of historic preservation, and Virginia did say that, this house is it. And when you remember, this house, it takes on something more than just the mission statement. It becomes very personal. And without further ado, I think I can explain it in picture. So thank you. Oh, please. Yeah, thank you. So here we have the Robert Jenkins house. Let's see if I need to go in the right direction. Let me go back. She's shutting the lights off. It'll make it a little clearer. So this program will take you through a brief history of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which Virginia really gave you a good summary of. The founding of the city of Hudson, and those together with the Robert Jenkins House, a home in Hudson. The program will provide several rare glimpses of the house and collections, including areas that are not open to the public. This is an unusual opportunity for those who enjoy the history of the greater area and the old houses here that tell the stories of people who live in them. Mrs. Pat Benoff, who I will introduce later when the lights are on, is our collections manager and for the chapter, and she has selected something very special to share with all of us tonight. Pat has graciously shared her many years of experience and expertise about this house and the founding of the city of Hudson. Pat and I will happily answer questions after this program. This is a photo of one of our Good Citizens Awards that is presented usually in the December meeting month. And we incorporate it with holiday festivity and award the students their winnings, their awards at that time. And Virginia did explain to you that qualification for membership in the society includes women at least 18 years of age, regardless of race, creed, or political affiliation, who could identify and prove descendants from an ancestor who served for the cause of independence during the American Revolution. DAR is not non-profit. DAR's mission is education, patriotism, and historic preservation. There are currently about 185,000 members in chapters in all 50 states and abroad. There are about 3,000 chapters. This photograph of this lovely lady is Margaret Mulford Collier. She was Hudson's founding regent. She formed the Hendrick Hudson chapter December 26, 1895. The chapter was chartered about a year and a half later, May 1st, 1896. And the first priority of business was to building fund for the purchase of a permanent chapter home. Realizing that DR chapters were beneficial to the communities in which they were located because of their dedication to volunteerism, leaders were inspired to support new chapter formation. So the city of Hudson at the time was very excited about the idea of having a chapter here, and they supported it wholeheartedly. So through membership, women received the opportunity for a unique voice at that time and a national network. And of course at a time when women still didn't have full participation in society. A DR chapter in Hudson was appreciated as a complement to the history of Hudson. A board of directors was formed from the community, a group of volunteers who were headed by a Hudson physician, Dr. H. Lyle Smith. Dr. Smith formed the first building fund committee, and his goal was founding a home for the chapter. So stepping back a little in time, this is a map of a stretch of the river along which Hudson would eventually be formed. And if you'll notice here, if I can point on this thing, it says Clover's Rack. And so this was originally called Clover, and Clover's Rack is where Hudson eventually took root. I love this map. It's such a great old look before there were any really much settlement here at all. So it's a simple sketch map from 1630 and written in primarily Dutch. And you'll notice that there were the clover and a lot of the words began with a K, and when the British came in, those K's changed to C. So hence, Clover's Rack became Clatter Rack. And let me see where I missed my place here. I don't want to lose something. The fact that this stretch of the river, literally a rack, may be translated to refer to a measured stretch or length along the river. So in actuality, in Dutch, that alludes to that. The map depicts the area of Cloverk Landing, which is nicely visible. The waterfront, subjected to Hudson's currents and tide, is protected from the change in the water by mud flats that separates Hudson from Athens, formerly Lunenburg. It was an ideal spot for shipping and manufacturing that the Nantucket settlers had in mind. The proprietors, as they were known, migrated from New England chiefly to gain access to the Hudson River trade route, accessing Manhattan and the global marketplace. Cloverk Landing, of course, was in the town of Cloverk. And in 1783, 30 men from Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and Providence, Rhode Island, formed a coalition of resources to relocate to an inland water port on the Hudson River. The group wanted to establish a commercially based shipping community. Their investment included about $100,000 in cash. Brothers Thomas and Seth Jenkins were the principal partners of the group, and they called themselves the proprietors. The search for riverfront property took them to several riverfront areas along the river, where they finally settled on this particular area for the reasons I explained previously. The protected area, that little stretch. Oh, I should go back and show you because I didn't point it out. But if you look here, this is mud flat, and that protects this front. So the harsh tide changes, and the river can get pretty choppy at times, but it's very well protected there, and as anybody who's on the river knows that's true. So going back, the proprietors purchased 3 parcels from the Huggaboom family, which are a very famous Cloverk family. They purchased a wharf, storefront, and underwater lots. So by underwater lots, that meant that the tide came in and covered them up and then went out and they were dry. So, and then they bought more land from the Hardick family, sealed the deal in Thomas Jenkins' name, and then sent for the rest of the investors and all of their families. This map, this section of map is from the Penfield map, and unfortunately it doesn't show quite as well on the screen. It's a little enlarged, but this spot here was the grid layout for the city of Hudson. This is South Bay, and that's North Bay. And there you have mud flat. Now, you see this little space here was an opening. I don't know if it was natural or if they actually created it. Maybe Pat knows that answer.
They created it.
They did create it.
Ferry used to go through there.
So the ferry used to go through there, and Athens, or Lunenburg as it would have been known back in the day, was right over there. It still is. It's still there. So this map shows the middle ground flat sandbar very well. The land purchased from Mrs. Hardick and her 3 sons extended from about the present-day Partition Street to North Bay. The land purchased from the Huggabooms extended to South Bay. These early Cloverk families were among the settlers that arrived to Clover's Rack with the Van Rensselaers. They actually were on the ship with Van Rensselaer family members. So Cloverk Landing very quickly became the city of Hudson. And the reason for that was the land purchased by the proprietors at Cloverk Landing was separated from the town of Cloverk and incorporated in 1785. So they arrived here in, 1783, and by 1785 they were all ready to petition the state legislature. Hudson experienced unprecedented growth. Once they started the process, there was a need to have access to the river. The New Englanders had been looking for that pass and a way to get their goods to shipping and then downstate to the markets in Manhattan and outward. What was I going to say here? Seth Jenkins purchased his lots on Main Street, Warren Street, which are the lots that contain these properties here. This particular picture was from a local artist. It was published in a book by a DAR member, Hudson Revisited, with the Hudson Bicentennial Committee in 1985, and the picture called The Hudson Riverfront. It's a painting about 1935 by Victor J. Dowling, who lived in Churchtown. And that is a wonderful picture. So it didn't take long for the proprietors to petition the legislature, making the community at Cloverk Landing an incorporated city named for Henry Hudson, I'm sorry. The legislature approved the request immediately because the proprietors had presented a cohesive plan, a proven success in business, feasibility for the town, for the growth and prosperity, and would encourage settlement of Columbia County. Seth Jenkins served as the first mayor of Hudson by appointment of Governor Clinton from the city's incorporation, April 22nd, 1785. He served until his death, until July 30th, 1793. Seth Jenkins' property was bequeathed to his 5 children, but 4 of the siblings offered their shares to Robert, each for $1. Robert's siblings were Emil, Robert, Sally, Seth Jr., and John. So the property that he got from his siblings includes the site that this house sits on now. This picture, and I put it here because it depicts the South Bay so beautifully. It's one of my favorites, Mount Marino and South Bay. It's stunning. So it's Henry Airy's view of Mount Marino and South Bay, about 1850. And if you turn to your right, above the mantle, is the painting. I think it's one of the most beautiful paintings. And this is a picture of Robert. He's the man who built this house. He was the second child of Seth and Dinah Folger. He was born in Nantucket, Massachusetts, and moved to Cloverk Landing in 1784 with his mother. And that's because the proprietors came first, left their families, they set up their homes and got things organized for their families to come, and the families came, that later. So about 30 of the proprietors' families joined Seth and Thomas Jenkins, who relocated ahead of the group. These settlers brought their possessions, even some bringing prefabricated house frames on their wagons. So Robert, according to some accounts, had presence. He inherited his father's demeanor and a strong business acumen. As evidence, Robert became the head of the first cotton mill in New York State by the age of 19. He was a stockholder in several local companies, including Columbia Turnpike. So that's the route from Hudson to Massachusetts, Columbia Turnpike. You probably heard a lot about that. That allowed wagon travel. So, let's see here. And he became a member of the Common Council of the City of Hudson. In 1800, Robert was appointed Hudson's 3rd mayor. He was appointed the 5th mayor in 1815. So at the time, mayors were appointed by the governor until 1823, when they were elected by the Common Council. After 1840, Hudson's mayors were elected by the people. Robert married Kitty Dayton in Hudson. Kitty's father was also a proprietor. And this picture of Robert, if you turn to the back wall, and it's that picture. When the lights come on, you'll get a much better view of that. We have great things in this house. It's so exciting. So this is the house that Robert built. About 1811. It's a federal period architectural design and features a hallmark segmental arch over the entrance and a corresponding window on the 2nd floor. So you're looking at the arches to determine that particular architectural feature. The construction is of Flemish bond, a method of brickwork that became the standard for brick building in the United States by the mid-19th century. And that makes the brick almost look like a tapestry. It's kind of a pattern. It's very pretty to see. You can't you can't see it in this picture unfortunately, but the chapter does not have any earlier photos or any detailed drawings of the house or plans, but the basic structure remains unchanged in spite of remodeling in 1900. The shutters in this picture are closed, but they were probably part of the 20th century remodel in any event. So you can see that, if you look there, you can see the grids from the shutters. And then you notice here, it had a staircase that went straight down. But all other things, even the gate, and the house next door was Seth's, his brother. So here's a rare eclipse for you. People can't get up into our attic on the 4th floor to see some of these things, but the rafters of the house were all hand-hewed, numbered, and joined with wooden pegs. So if you notice, there's the marks. I don't know if any of them are signed with the names of the workers or contractors. Sometimes they were, but we have at least this, where they were all assembled, or they were all cut and designed for the particular spot they went in. The beams extend the whole length of the house. They are amazing testament to the forestry that was here. And I would say they're oak beams and probably from the original forest. I don't know if they were local or they came from a distance. I don't know. Pat, do you know that?
No.
If they trucked them in here somehow?
No.
No, or they were real from our forest. But in any event, they had to be New York Virgin Forest wood. So this photo offers a perspective of the size of the hand-hewn rafters. Dutch colonial structures built primarily in the Hudson Valley reflect construction styles from Holland and Flanders. Craftsmen used stone and brick more extensively in the Hudson Valley than other regions. And the brick walls of the house are about 2 feet thick in some spots. So Robert and Kitty Dayton had one child here in this house. Her name was Carolyn. She grew up here. Robert enjoyed his new home with his family, but only for about 8 years because he was knocked off of his own sloop on the Hudson River and died of his injuries very early, at the age of 47. Caroline married Jenkins, his daughter, grew up, married Dr. Samuel White in Hudson in 1830, and they had one daughter while living here. Her name was Frances Chester. She was born in 1833. But in 1936, the family decided to move to Manhattan. This photograph is very interesting, and you can see parts of it. What you're looking at here is the Hudson waterfront in 1830. And this is looking at it from Athens. Is 1830 right, or is 1808? I think this is 1808, and my copy here is from 1830. It says the photo is an aquatint print on copper, 1820 view of Hudson. Okay, so that explains it. And that's a middle ground flats. Let's see. After the White family moved to New York City, the home was left vacant for many years, and there's no record of the house being leased or rented out. But in about 1851-52, the house was used to house the Isaac Bradbury School for Boys. So the names of some of the students can be seen written on the bricks in black. So we have several more of those. This is just a sampling of those. In all, the house was bought and sold 3 times after the White family. That would be Caroline, her mother, and her husband, and Frances Chester moved to Manhattan. After Mrs. Robert Jenkins, that's Kitty, passed away in 1958, the house was sold to the Parsons family. It was finally actually sold. And after being vacant for some 22 years. Some years later, the Freeborn family purchased the home from the Parsons family. Sarah Freeborn, their only daughter, was a renowned sculptor. Her work can be found in Hudson, primarily angels, and they're in Christchurch, Episcopal, and we have some of her work upstairs in our collections as well. The Chadmans were the last family to reside in the house until 1899, when it was purchased from Frances Chester White. Robert's granddaughter, so she purchased it back, but I'll get to that story after. Meanwhile, as the occupancy of the house in Hudson changed over the years, Robert's daughter Caroline and her family made their lives in New York City. Dr. Samuel White, remember they came from Hudson, enjoyed a very rewarding career as a surgeon of note. And together, Caroline, Jenkins, and Samuel had 8 children, Frances Chester being their eldest. On adulthood, Frances married Marcellus Hartley. In 1855, she was 22 years old. The young couple was married at this Madison Square Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. This church, it was demolished. Let's see, it was at Madison Square. Mr. Hartley was an extremely successful businessman. He became a principal in the Remington Arms Company, and Mrs. Hartley accompanied her husband extensively for business, both at home and abroad. In 1863, Hartley was appointed agent of arms and munitions for the Union Army during the Civil War. The Hartleys' wealth and their generosity ultimately made the Robert Jenkins House as a DAR chapter house possible. Pictured, well, I went over that. And here she is. This is our benefactress, Frances Chester White Hartley, painting from 1900. She was about 66 years old when this picture was done. She had become an active member of the DAR around the time that John and Augusta Chadman were the owners of her grandfather's home here in Hudson. It was at this time that a book, Mary and I Go to Europe, was on its 3rd publication. Dr. Lyle Smith was the chairman of the Hendrick Hudson Chapter Building Fund, and after touring Europe with his wife, he decided to write memoirs of their trip as a fundraising project for the chapter. The little book about the couple's travels to Europe was very popular locally. Sales from the book became the cornerstone of the building fund, and all of the proceeds of the book sales were used exclusively for the chapter house. The book and Hendrick Hudson chapter story to fund a house found its way to Mrs. Hartley. On reading this book, Frances was so moved that she immediately set in motion a plan to provide a home for the chapter house. Frances may not have realized how far that plan would take her in reconnecting to a founder, a grandfather, and the home in which she herself was born. On November 11, 1899, Frances Hartley purchased the beautiful mansion at 113 Warren Street, which she named the Robert Jenkins House in honor of her grandfather. Mrs. Hartley paid $6,000 for the house. She paid another $25,000 to renovate the house to accommodate chapter functions and activities. In May 1900, Mrs. Hartley, let's see here, I can't get down to my notes, presented the house as a gift to the chapter. In doing so, she stipulated that the house was to be used for the chapter. She stipulated also, she had a lot of requirements. She stipulated there would always be a free public library here, a museum, and a cultural center for the people of the city of Hudson. Her statement on presenting the house was printed in the Daily Republican, the Hudson newspaper, and she said, "In no better way could I honor the memory of my ancestors, the founder of the city of Hudson, and honor the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, than to gift the house to the Hendrick Hudson chapter." This chapter house would be the 2nd chapter house in the United States. The first one being in Washington, D.C. And so, if you remember, today there are chapters in all 50 states and abroad, about 3,000 chapters. We were the 2nd chapter house. So this painting, I think it depicts a rather noble-looking person. The DAR provided a uniquely American pedigree. It was something that they could research and link membership to something greater, to give them a sense of belonging in a way that American society didn't have, as opposed to what Europe had. This painting is located in the 2nd floor west parlor. The artist is George Tiarada, 1899, and you'll get to see it when you go upstairs. This picture was taken from a newspaper article from the Daily Republican in 1900. And in it, they quoted, "It remains now for Hudsonians to appreciate this new undertaking by their uses and care of it. Robert Jenkins' house. The gift is a noble one and is left to us citizens of Hudson to see that it is sustained, maintained, cherished, and made fruitful. It is one of which every member of this community should be proud, as it makes a new era in our life and is a step onward in that movement, which we hope shall eventually place our delightful Hudson among the foremost cities in the state." So Hudson was very proud of it. And I think there was good reason for that thinking. This is a concept drawing. Mrs. Hartley had much more grand plans for this house. And they didn't materialize. And some would say for the better and some not. The drawing is from the Michael O'Connor architectural firm of Hudson, 1899. And here you can see the roof is, you know, there's, what do you call it? Oh shoot, I moved nothing. The extra windows, I'm trying to get the pointer. The extra windows peaked here. We don't have any windows on the roof at all, so it's just this clock tower was to be visible throughout the city. They put balconies here. So very, very grand plan. Mrs. Hartley, oh my God, I can't talk. Mrs. Hartley carefully studied and planned the chapter building needs and the purpose of each room. The first floor front rooms were to be used for a public library and reading room for the people of Hudson, and the rear oval room was intended to be a foyer for a theater which Mrs. Hartley added for the purpose of augmenting chapter income. The original center hall staircase was removed, so there wasn't a staircase, it is believed, in this front hall area. And an elegant staircase was added in the oval room in its place. On the second floor, the right front room remains a repository for historic collections, and the second story left front room was used for chapter business and painted in DAR colors. The house did maintain a library. It was a free public library, the first one in the city of Hudson. There were over 10,000 volumes housed here, and it was a comprehensive collection, including genealogical records, but it was maintained for, you know, all interests and resources for research. The library was closed in 1959 when Hudson developed its own library, and many of the volumes were donated. This library kept the genealogical records, which we still have. And we continue to maintain a library for the public use, and we're open by appointment and at some scheduled hours during the summer months, which we try to make very visible. This is the first floor west parlor, was designed as a library. It was the first floor, and I went over that already. In the center here is a sign that was, there were two of them, one on each side of the front door. And the card catalog is here. You'll see that in the other room when you go for the tour. That's still in use. We actually use that. And, well, you get to see that when you go in. In the, up near the ceiling, right behind the door there, you'll notice some large bones. So those are the whale jaw bones. It's actually the complete mandibular jaw of a small, they said it was a baby whale. I know, it's very, very, and you'll appreciate how large it is when you actually see it. The bones were, they were used as sort of a decorative arch at the other end of around 7th Street or 6th Street on Warren Street. And in 1894 it was brought to the chapter house by a Dr. Smock and a Colonel Lathrop, who rescued it from being destroyed. The regent at the time thought the bones would be of interest to children who use the library. And you know, she was right. I think that everybody who comes in this chapter house, if they know about that, that's one of the first things they want to see, and when they do see it, they're really excited by it. This is a library, this is a window at the library, but the reason I took this picture is to kind of demonstrate the shutter. If you'll see, each one of our windows has that casement folding shutter. They're closed here in this room. The shutters are used to keep homes warm during the winter months. Some speculate they were used against hostile native attacks, but I doubt that was the case here in Hudson at the time that this house was built. All of the shutters here are fully functional, and they do help with energy conservation. And we do use them for that reason. And they're beautiful. This plaque is dedicated to Seth Jenkins Sr. and Robert, his son, founding mayors. Seth was appointed the first mayor of Hudson, Seth the father, in 1785. And as I explained previously, he served until his death in 1793. And you'll be able to see that plaque in the oval dining room. The rooms in the house were intended differently in 1900 than they are historically depicted and used today. The current dining room had been intended as the activity room. In this picture, if you look very carefully, you can see the theater in the back. The house was painted white at that time, and the library signs that I talked about are visible here. After the renovation, the staircase was changed. And I think it was changed because the sidewalk, the original old staircase encroached on the sidewalk too far, so they had to change it. The theater accommodated 320 seats. So there's leaded glass, well, there are two doors in that oval room in the back, and above them are leaded glass windows atop each. Those doors led to the theater. So that room was really the foyer and kind of a reception area for people going to their programs. Some of the theater seats are we still have some up in the attic. They're in their original condition, so maybe someday we'll get them renovated or restored and bring them downstairs. But going back to Mrs. Hartley's intent to provide for the house in the future, part of the remodeling included addition of a complete, well-planned theater. It was constructed of brick exterior walls and white trim to match the house, and was attached at the oval room where two doorways entered into each side. The theater was for programs and events for people of Hudson to enjoy and to provide a sustaining means of support for the house. A full-size stage, 15 feet by 74 feet long, and plush velvet seating and updated lighting made the theater thoroughly on trend. From the research that I had done, they said that the lighting, the degree of the new electric lighting that was put in this house was just near to amazing. She converted some of the gas lights, and we do have a gas light here in this oval dining room. That it was an original gas converted to electric, but they said that she was so progressive in her thinking with that this insignia that we have in our attic is actually electrified, and it had the old-fashioned. It still has the old-fashioned bulbs. There's the little glass bulbs, and each one was painted, blue and red. And it was just, it must have been an amazing sight to see. You can imagine at the time that was probably the best, snappiest thing to have. So it was a very sad time for the chapter when, throughout the late 1950s and 60s, maintenance and repair expenses for the theater became prohibited, and it had to be demolished in 1960. The Clever Players theatrical group had contracted for 10 years programming when the theater was closed by the city due to the fact that it became hazardous to be there. The colors used for the theater were of deep shades of terracotta with ornate details in white, DAR insignia blue, and as I said, the lighting was dramatic. This is an absolutely spectacular painted screen backdrop for the stage. It represents the Henry Hudson on the river. And I think is this a beaver? There's a beaver and an Indian. So it depicts life that he found as he came up the river. And it accounted for, the name of the theater was the Henry Hudson Hall. This picture in color was shown in the National Geographic, the March 19th issue, 1962. Now, after that, the theater was torn down, the curtain was taken down, and it was put in safekeeping. And it was, placed in different places apparently. It was very, very large, and it's gone missing. We don't know where it is, but it's quite something. So this is just a picture of the dining room. Of course, you'll get to walk through, but that's the light that was converted, an original gas light. And the leaded windows over the doors leading into the theater there. And so the oval room is used as a reception room now. And I explained the gas light. And this is the grand stairway. It was installed in 1900, so it replaced a very basic center hall staircase. Remembering this was a family home, so it had the typical center hall, and then it had probably 4 or 5 bedrooms of stairs. That has very much changed. So the original staircase was thought to have been central, and the house was typical federal style with rectangular 4/4 plan. The remodel in 1900 enlarged the entry foyer. It is believed that this wall probably was moved, and the staircase removed. All the fixtures were updated during the remodeling and included gas and electric lights, stage lighting, restrooms were installed on each level. So if you remember Dr. White, this beautiful leaded glass window is featured at the landing of the grand staircase. And the window was donated by Dr. White, who chaired that major fund drive with the sale of his book, Mary and I Go to Europe. The official DAR insignia is prominent at the center of the window. So that is the DAR insignia, and I'll explain that. In 1774, Abigail Adams wrote a letter from her home in Massachusetts to her husband, John Adams, who was away attending the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. In this letter, Abigail Adams wrote, "As for me, I will seek wool and flax and work willingly with my hands, and indeed there is occasion for all our industry and economy." The seal of the National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, was chosen to reflect the spirit of the women who lived during the Revolutionary War period. On October 18, 1890, the Committee on Insignia and Seal reported that the design for the seal should be the figure of Abigail Adams in the costume of 1776, seated at a spinning wheel. The seal shows a woman of the Revolution seated at a spinning wheel distaff in her hand. The 13 stars represent the original 13 colonies, and the dates 1776 and 1890 signify the founding of our country and the founding of NSDAR, whose name appears around its edge. The original seal was adopted on December 11, 1890, and has undergone minor changes over the years. The current seal was adopted in April 17, 1979. So these are pictures of the upstairs rooms. Here we have a seating room, which is the upper left. This is the main upstairs balcony area. You'll get to see that better. The room in the photo on the left was intended to be the DIR chapter room, according to accounts of the transfer of the house to the chapter. The colors specified were blue and white, and the insignia was to be prominently displayed here. This room was intended for the work of the chapter. Over the years, with many donations of artifacts and the consolidation of the reading room into the library, the second floor DAR room was moved to the first floor. This lovely large space is now used to display fine furnishings and art belonging to the chapter. The arch fan window that you see at the front of the house, and this is the second floor window, with elegant features that were added to the house, added when the house was remodeled in 1900. So in keeping with the intent of the gift, the chapter maintains a museum at the house. Each room in the house holds historic collections and artifacts donated from people throughout the area, served by the chapter and beyond. The exhibits change regularly, and in conjunction with World War I 100th anniversary, there is an exhibit upstairs. Now, I think it's still up there in space until November of this year, I believe. This is a rare glimpse of some wallpaper. The entire house was wallpapered, actually, when it was renovated in 1900. So this is some remaining wallpaper that's fairly intact, actually. It's on our side entrance area. And this is another section of wallpaper. I have no idea where that one may have been. But there were very bold patterns and shades. And so, in conclusion, the house has been the chapter's home for over 121 years now, and is the chapter's primary historic preservation initiative in keeping with the tenets of DAR. Both short and long-term goals are continually reevaluated by the executive board and represented to membership as the needs of the house are determined in order to maintain the house for the chapter and the good people of Hudson for generations to come. When Mrs. Hartley passed away on April 9, 1909, her personal estate was worth many millions of dollars in cash and property, and she gave generously to family, friends, employees, and many people who lived right here in Hudson. But to her daughter Helen, she bequeathed a dining room table, and nothing else. So by way of explanation, she stated that she thought Helen would really like that table. And then she would realize that she had not been forgotten from the will. So, and then I'll leave you with that one because we don't know exactly the rest of that story. So please, it says come and visit, but you're here. So, and this is a great monarch butterfly from our award-winning pollinator garden. There you go. Yeah, it's fun. I hope you were all able to see okay, because there's some, and people in the outside, I hope you got to see.
We actually could see back there.
You could?
Yeah, and I think Pat's gonna speak and then...
Well, yeah, I'm gonna introduce Pat and introduce her exhibit that she brought down. Pat has put on exhibit something very special. And we, as I said, we change our exhibits routinely. That changes all the time. And Pat is our collections manager, expert extraordinaire. So.
This is the grid plan that the proprietors came up with for the city of Hudson. And on the left here is a list of the proprietors and a number by each one. That is the property that they purchased on this map. Like Seth Jenkins, he purchased 13 and 14, I believe, which is these two houses. We have the original proprietors' minutes. And I can't touch them because you're supposed to wear gloves. And this is Thomas Jenkins. He was the main man with all the money. And these are actually business letters in this book. And here is, this one I can handle. This is a collection of money. And Seth Jenkins was president of the Bank of Hudson, but it's not the first mayor. This was his son, because this is dated 1817, and his father was already dead. But I just brought this down because it goes along with Jeannie's talk. So I have all the money in archival.
Is it worth anything? Is the money worth anything?
I don't know.
It's priceless.
It's just paper.
Probably more to a collector than.
How would you like to hold it up here so people can, I don't know if they can see better? If you can see
Oh, $10, huh?
Yeah.
This is the stuff I do in my spare time. You know, one interesting thing that we have upstairs, we just received it from the American Legion, was a uniform from Robert W. Evans, who had the brewery here in Hudson. So when you go upstairs, we'll point that out to you. It was World War I.
May I ask where you got the money? Where that was found? Or?
Everything just about in the house is donated. We have very few items on loan.
Who
This is
like,
one of them.
Do you know who donated the money? Where it came from?
Probably some of it. Way back when people didn't do good bookkeeping, so we lost out on a lot of information that way. But what I did through the years was go through the minutes of our DAR and newspaper clippings, and I found a lot of donors that way. So that was helpful. So we'll go through the house and I'll explain some of the things that we have.
And before we leave, I just want to point out, during your tour, you're going to see some beautiful flower arrangements, and they were all donated and created by the Green Court Garden Club. So thank you very much.
And I just wanted to point out, we have some articles that we sell. They will be available in this room if you're interested in looking at them. Pictures of that beautiful window. Playing cards. Were there any other questions?
How many members are there in this chapter?
In this chapter, about 119, I think is less now. It's going up because there are a couple of proposed.
And how many come to a meeting?
We have about maybe 25, 20, 25, you know, many of our members are from out of state. We hear from them periodically.
How many members do you have in this chapter?
About 119, but we're always in the process, so we have a couple that are proposed right now. And
How do you find out who you're related to? Who are you related to?
we have people that help you. That's what we do. We have genealogists.
Are you related to someone?
Am I related to someone?
You're related to someone.
I am.
We are.
I am.
Yeah, where did your person come from?
My person came. My person, I have an easy one. It's Livingston.
I don't remember mine.
John Livingston, I'm from the Livingston.
Oh.
This could be, I'm sorry. This was an easy one because it's a direct line. Sometimes you really get to study and you learn, and you find cousins that you never knew you had. You can see, yeah, it's, yeah. You always, in Virginia, were you related?
Oh, yeah, you know, if Gretchen were here, our registrar, she would give you my
She
whole
knows.
history. But I can't.
Yeah, we have genealogists who do that.
She knows everything.
She helps, yeah.
How does it break down the Dutch and the English and the other?
How does it break down, you mean, as far as what are?
Your members? How many have Dutch descent and how many have English?
You know, if you're a local genealogy, your history goes through this area, you will probably have been Dutch.
Yeah.
More than likely.
Oh, yeah.
Probably more Dutch if you're a local here, as opposed to, say, migrated here from Nantucket, because that was New England, and boy, they were separate. Dutch was spoken here as the primary language well into the mid-18th like 1850. Then it was spoken by home. And a lot of our colloquialisms, I can't talk tonight for some reason, I'll talk sometime. Some things that we very commonly say are Dutch derivatives. So there's things like people say, I'm gonna go fishing at the creek. Well, that's Dutch. Sitting on a stoop.
Crick shoes.
What is it? I'm sorry?
Crick shoes. Don't you
Crick
have
shoes.
crick shoes?
That's Dutch. I think we just thought it was sort of upstate New York slang, but it's really, it goes to Dutch. Cookie, cookies, Dutch. So I guess, yeah, that's cooking or something like that. And, what else is kind of interesting?
Kindergarten?
There's some, well, probably, yeah, sure, Kinder, either Dutch or German. But you know it was Dutch and then German, and then English, and then Dutch, and then English. We floated, and we have Ks, and then we have Cs, and we don't know if we're coming or going. So we have Clover's rack, and then we have Clovrink.
Overreach.
Cloverreach. That sort of came in after. I think the British did that. I don't know. Just saying, but.
So I have a question.
Sure.
The staircase, you say, was part of the renovation,
Yes.
but that side staircase is reminiscent of staircases of Nantucket. Was there
Yes.
any kind of connection
Yes.
there?
Yes, very much. Mrs. Hartley, in her design plan, really wanted to harken back to that Nantucket origin. So some of those wallpapers, and actually I did forget to mention that, but they are what would have been used in a house in Nantucket of the period.
Yeah.
So she completely bypassed the Dutch. Are we all ready to go on a tour?